Hello and welcome to the A Show. That's E with an acute accent. My name is Parker Bovée. Today we're going to be talking about the state of the plant-based meat market, specifically on how to improve it, especially in terms of quality and price of manufacturing, especially looking at those inputs on the manufacturing side, as well as the manufacturing processes. How we're going to go ahead and do this is a first initial breakdown of the initial history of plant-based protein, very brief, and come up to where we stand today, some of the market trends up until today, that being November 25th, 2023. Before finally moving on to what the future looks like, promising technologies, innovations, and the specific market trend that I want to address today, and the article that inspired it, that being from Forward Fooding, the B2B-ization of the alternative protein space. This is written by Alessio D'Antino, again on Forward Fooding. I'm also going to be referencing a couple different graphs or articles by the Good Food Institute. I'll do my best to name them. The main one being reducing the price of alternative proteins. Now, as a first and initial definition, an alternative protein is an alternative protein source from, that being from as in not derived from, animals. So here you're going to include plant-based protein. You're going to include specific types of fermentation, like fungal fermentation, precision fermentation, air fermentation, for example, all things that I hope to cover eventually. And the final one being cultivated meat. We're going to, touch on cultivated meat a little bit, not so much precision fermentation though, more fermentation generally. So what you had as a market development in plant-based protein was a very rapid rise of a couple companies, and to name a few, Impossible Foods, Beyond Meat. These companies were the recipients, not just these three clearly, but the industry as a whole, were the recipients of billions of dollars poured in, hundreds of millions at a company level for some of them. Billions of dollars, $2.1 billion specifically in 2021 at a minimum, poured into plant-based protein manufacturing of meat analogs. So think of this as the plant-based mincemeats, the ground beef replica kind of analog, a sausage, plant-based sausages. These companies produce these using a process called extrusion, in which a number of ingredients, think chickpeas, wheat, starches, kind of potato-y things, are funneled into a tube, really, with a kind of like a corkscrew-ish maneuver, or device rather, not maneuver, in the middle that churns all the ingredients, exposes it to pressure and heat externally, and forms these kind of ground textures that come out of the other end. That's called extrusion. The device mentioned is an extruder. Very good piece of technology for producing plant-based proteins. So fast forward from the founding of, I believe, Impossible was in 2008 and Beyond was 2011. Fast forward from that to 2022. December. The total amount invested in plant-based protein is a minimum of $1.1 billion. A $1 billion decline at a minimum from the year before. So something had gone wrong, clearly. There's a couple things to denote here. Again, I'm not going to spend too much time on this market overview, but the rise of cultivated meat in countries like the US, in Israel, and in Singapore. Singapore is a huge player in the alternative protein space to denote generally, and I'm going to continue coming back to them. the rise of the amount of funding for those two, as well as a gradual maturation of plant-based protein, kind of limited the amount of opportunity there was for investors, mainly venture capital firms. And so plant-based now finds itself in this interesting environment where there's a clear manufacturing process, but there's not any new expansion in terms of investment coming in on a large scale. Why is that, though? You could attribute part of it to the rise of other alternative proteins, cultivated and fermented, as I said. That's certainly part of it. There's only so much money to go around, unfortunately, as we now find ourselves in. Although you could just keep printing it, I guess, as we've done as a country. But besides the point, a big issue is simply consumer taste. And part of consumer taste is price. I'm now going to go through, from the Good Food Institute, a evaluation of price competitiveness by plant or by animal-based food category. So, a plant-based egg is 113% more expensive than an animal-based egg. A plant-based meat generally, and this is general, is 43% more expensive than animal-based meat. The meat here is interesting because that varies. Plant-based beef, for example, is more expensive than plant-based ground beef usually, or plant-based chicken usually, things like this. Not always the case because certain textures are harder to do than others, but 43% on average. Cheese, 40% more expensive. Ice cream, 28% more expensive. Yogurt, 12% more expensive. Milk, 11% more expensive. And butter, 7% more expensive. So something interesting that you're seeing here is that the ideal products that would be harder to manufacture, in this case, taking a plant and making it into something that it's not, are meat and eggs. That's not out of the realm of possibilities. Now, it's not, something that's a far cry of, analysis. People probably could have predicted that. That said, though, something that's interesting. Give me 1 second. In 2021, Impossible Foods was able to lower its product pricing by 20%. This is in addition to a previous product drop earlier that year. It's been 2 years since those product drops. And there's something really important to think about when you can't scale down a product's pricing over 2 years. And I think the thing here that we're going to talk about now is a couple different ways to improve the overall efficiency of the plant-based meat manufacturing market. So, number one, and the title line of this episode is going to be based on the article I referenced from Forwarding Food. There needs to be a greater B2B-ization of this market. There needs to be a greater specification of the startups in this market and what they have on offer. Currently, the plant-based market was set by Impossible Foods and Beyond Meat as you manufacture your product and you sell it to your customers. I'm coming here and saying today, this is not a sustainable business model if price parity is your goal. You've already achieved mass production. You have Impossible and Beyond sitting on commercial shelves. What you do not have is price parity with animal-based products. And I'm going to have an episode on the benefits of plant-based versus animal-based meats later on. But what I will say here, and I'll say it now, is plant-based is by far better for environmental health indicators such as greenhouse gas metrics, erosion, water use, and we're not getting better in those areas as a country, that being the United States. We're getting worse, especially in traditional livestock and dairy epicenters of the US, like California, there's not the water there used to be. So, moving beyond that, going back to B2B, business to business is the future of this industry space. Currently, it's occupied as a business to consumer space. So, we're going to focus on a couple areas where you can really explore substantive price reductions in this space if you operate on a business to business perspective. One is going to be ingredients. So, the current model is Impossible Foods locates crop producers from various parts in the United States and the world. They secure agreements based on their formulation demands. They need 10 tons of chickpeas, 5 tons of carrots, 3 tons of, let's say cabbage. They take that, they process it through external or internal processors, and they eventually funnel it through their extrusion. They have the end product, they deliver it to consumers. The solution is not vertical integration of that. The solution here is trying to find better ingredients. And now we're going to explore what that means. So, the ingredient space is one that is going to drastically change in the next 15 to 20 years, with a real emphasis on genetic modification. And this isn't going to be something that can be regulated away. If you do, you're just not going to be able to utilize the competitive advantage it gives. The 6 primary categories of expenditures in plant-based manufacturing, I'm going to list them now, are channel costs and margins, logistics, production and packaging, materials, selling, general and administrative expenses, and R&D. Materials is 20% of that. Materials, production and packaging, and channel costs and margins, as well as selling and general administrative expenses, all account for 20% of expenditures for most plant-based manufacturers. These vary, but this is from the Good Food Institute. If you're going to tackle the ingredient space, you need to allow ingredient producers to give you the highest quality products that are directly designed and tailored for manufacturing goods. You need to have crops that are made explicitly for the plant-based market. And what this looks like, a great example is Nucicer, a startup functioning out of, I believe, California, with partnerships with the University of California, Davis, as well as Bayer, a global conglomerate for ingredients and food, who are focusing explicitly on chickpea production and genetic engineering around chickpeas. They have a genetic library with hundreds of variations of chickpeas that is far and away more diverse than any commercial genetic library. The value of certain crops, like chickpea, is that they have specific qualities that are beneficial for manufacturers, these being absence of taste while with a high protein content and being genetically malleable, let's say. They have a lot of genetic variation and threads that can be pulled for expression of protein or foaminess, the ability to be processed under heat more easily, as well as things like drought resistance, disease resistance, ability to grow in acidic soils. It's not all about manufacturing these foods that are abnormal. It's about creating a more earth-friendly product on every scale. The final product of a plant-based burger is more environmentally friendly than something that's been processed in a factory farm. It just is. That said, also creating a crop that can be grown anywhere distributes this and proliferates it to a global extent. So, on the ingredient side, being able to produce and companies supporting companies that are able to produce ingredients that are tailored for the plant-based meat manufacturing is a B2B-ization of this space. It doesn't need to just be Beyond Meat, buying out farms, creating their own Beyond Meat farm and expanding into that. Having trust in local providers, utilizing new genetic engineering techniques such as ODM or CRISPR, being able to really genetically modify a product and make it into a manufacturing crop, which is something maybe we haven't heard of before. But moving on from that, the ingredient space is going to be crucial. And now I think we get into something that's very interesting, and I'm going to use it as a bridge. The use of artificial intelligence and bioinformatics in the plant-based meat space. So what this looks like, for example, take Notco. They amongst other things, they are their own commercial distributor of plant-based products. They also have commercial partnerships with Kraft Heinz and Burger King and Shake Shack to explore retail partnerships, which we'll touch on again later. But Notco provides algorithms to chefs. They provide plant-based formulations and ingredients and finished goods. They have the chefs taste them and give their input on things ranging from olfactory, so the smells of the dining experience, the tastes and the textures, and the mouth feels. They have various metrics, and it's an online platform. They input their data, it comes back, and they've created this very robust algorithm, a number of algorithms actually, including all of those senses that I just mentioned, as well as an ingredients section with labels on each of those. And what this allows them to do on a formulation sector, we're gonna now delineate kind of what the value chain looks like for plant-based proteins. We're no longer on raw materials now, we're on formulation. So it goes on a value chain: raw materials, processing of raw materials, formulation into what the plant-based meat is going to be composed of, manufacturing that plant-based product, and then the retail sale of it. So formulation, the prototyping of that good. You're going to see dramatic price reductions here. And this is where I really think the direct interplay between the commercial giants, Impossible and Beyond, is going to be important. You're going to see them, and you already are. I'm not going to name any company names out of discretion for their request, but you're seeing startups partner with Impossible Foods. I do feel able to mention the larger company, just not the smaller one. Impossible Foods is subcontracting out with smaller startups to do their prototyping. And you ask yourself, well, why are they doing this? They're a massive company. They don't need expenditure in the formulation prototyping phase. The companies that need the funds to do so and aren't ready for full commercial scaling are these smaller startups. So there's a partnership, and it's a win-win for each sector, or each part. A small startup focused on 3D printing, which is a rising technology in the formulation phase, or Notco, for example, is able to take their ingredient algorithms or take their 3D printer and experiment with different formulations, give their opinions, give back texture analysis, send it back to Impossible, who have slight recommendations, send it back, and then they create a finished product. This takes away all the capital needs of having formulation testing and prototyping centers for Impossible or Beyond. And it also gives really valuable testing experience to the smaller startups, who can then go on to the commercial aspect if they feel that that's their need. So the formulation side of it is going to be key, and I think a huge part there is the use of artificial intelligence to create these algorithms for ingredient discovery and formulation partnership. And artificial intelligence also has applications in the genomic altering that I mentioned earlier for the raw materials and ingredients. That's super important for being able to sequence a genome very quickly, identify the structures that are important for protein expression, and then try to heighten those or heighten the expression of those. Exceptionally important is the use of machine learning specifically. So moving on from there, the ultimate manufacturing side, this is where I think it really gets interesting, and this is where we have ties back to the other alternative proteins. Extrusion by itself, while being the industry standard for the last decade, is not sufficient to meet product pricing demands from consumers. I say it again. In a more simplified way, extrusion was the technology of yesterday. For it to be the technology of today and tomorrow, it has to massively reinvent itself. The demand for ground products, sausage, plant-based ground beef, will always exist to some varying extent. However, to expand on a consumer demand, that I'm going to list out some metrics now, from 2020 to 2022 has declined by almost $30 million. There need to be massive reinventions of the commercial approach. There need to be more products offered, higher quality products offered. And where you're going to get this is with the new technology. You can't make whole cuts of meat with extrusion. So I'm going to quickly name a couple technologies to focus: 3D printing, which I've already mentioned, and protein spinning. I'm going to spend the time to talk about protein spinning now. Imagine you had a syringe filled with an orange liquid. The liquid is comprised of pea protein, carrot, and oats blended. And you you extrude the solution out through the tip of the syringe, and you pass a high voltage current through it. And on the end of this kind of a tray on the bottom, you have an electrode that is pulling the currents as it's being spun. So the solution is pressed through the syringe. High voltage currents pass through it. They're being shot basically through this solution, and they're being stretched. The currents take it to the right, and then back to the left, and then back to the right, and then back to the left, and then back to the right, as it's kind of being flung about by the electrodes at the bottom. It's eventually collected and then used and processed and spun and used in things like 3D printers to create a whole cut, a steak. That's electrostatic spinning. You also have wet spinning and dry jet wet spinning. Similar processes. The solution is passed through a syringe. It's then coiled between two kind of circular, think of them almost as gears, before it's collected again on another tray. The only difference between the two I just mentioned being wet spinning is submerged immediately. Dry jet wet spinning is initially released from the syringe above water, passed through water, and then collected outside water. So, why are these important? The idea of protein spinning is borrowed from the fashion industry. Life 3 is a company out of Singapore who actually borrowed this technology from mask production, partnered with the National University of Singapore to explore commercialization, and now they're on their way to producing commercial products. The whole idea here is a spinning of a protein is a much more scalable technology than the extrusion of them. Whether that is accurate remains to be seen. However, I make the argument here under the broad banner again of B2B-ization of the plant-based protein market. When you have companies like Life3 and Project Eden, another spinning company, who are able to offer a new product and a new protein texture and a new style of protein manufacturing, the market itself becomes richer with opportunity. It's the exact same concept of offering, enhanced protein chickpea, or let's say a vegetable with no elements of earthiness or bitterness. You see this with a lupin, which is a new crop that was previously unused, but being able to genetically alter it to remove any bitterness and increase sweetness tones makes it more viable. One of the primary applications of spinning, protein spinning, is incorporating cultivated fat. This is where we get back to the other alternative protein sources. Cultivated fat, implementing pockets of fat in a spun and printed steak that achieves a texture that is impossible to do so with extrusion. So, what I'm offering you is the idea that the manufacturing section of this area, or of this industry of plant-based meat, has only more to grow. And when you think about the idea that the entire seafood market, really, poultry is also a big struggle, but the seafood market is fundamentally very untapped. You have now rising plant-based tuna, shrimp, for example, but the whole cuts are really missing. And there's a demand growing in the Asian Pacific and Latin America. Latin America experienced a 35% consumer demand increase last year. So there needs to be a greater proliferation of companies offering diversified services to other companies in this space for all the negatives I just laid out about Impossible Foods and Beyond Meat. That their technology is not scalable in a price-efficient manner when compared to animal-based meat. That they're not offering a diversified amount of products that consumers are demanding. For all of that, amongst their other issues, they have a commercial brand that is so entrenched with a consumer in America. And I don't want to speak on Europe. Europe has their own plant-based protein brands, but Europe actually has the most stable plant-based meat consumption in the world. So there are brands out there like Impossible and Beyond. Those will be my two case studies that have the opportunity to lead this in a way. And the burden isn't so much on outside investors coming in and promoting new technologies that are going to radically, redefine plant-based meat. I don't think the need is even there for that. The need is really going to come from a grassroots of ingredients, slight manufacturing improvements, prototyping acceleration, and above all of that, partnership between companies. It's not even that there needs to be more companies. There needs to be a proliferation of partnership between companies. A company like Notco is achieving such great success because they have made such great strides in implementing partnerships at every level, be it from the cooks at high-level restaurants who purchase and use their food, be it the consumers at fast food restaurants, fast food being the fastest growing actually sector for plant-based consumption, while retail sales in grocery stores have declined by that $30 million metric I was discussing over the last 2 years. Food service has actually increased by nearly almost $100 million. We're looking at right now probably closer to, let's say, $150 million, $160 million increase in the last 2 years in food service plant-based meat sales. Notco offers so many things, and in addition, that algorithm I was discussing earlier. So all of these things touch on other, companies within this space. You have the corporate engagement on the partnership side, Kraft Heinz creating all of their plant-based options through Notco. The algorithm formulation being delivered to other startups and incorporating other startups, but also incorporating the chefs and consumers. There needs to be a greater diversification in who people work with, who people sell to, but most importantly, a diversification of companies within this space. You see a lot of companies now pulling out of their commercial offerings for plant-based products. Tyson, for example, just pulled back on their plant-based offerings, citing the market as not developed enough and needing cost reductions. Kerry, another great example, now offers a a plant-based fat ingredient. So you're seeing something interesting here. You're seeing a transition from plant-based meat offerings to plant-based ingredient offerings. You're letting manufacturers figure out the manufacturing. You're letting commercial brands be commercial brands, and you're letting ingredients producers be ingredients producers. Just give the market time. Plant-based protein and meat is not a fad. It's an environmentally beneficial sector and industry and offering. Consumers are very interested in it. However, there need to be price reductions. And the way you get that is by specification within the market through product partnerships and manufacturing partnerships at all levels. So, if there's a couple things to leave this kind of a discussion with, I would say future growth in the market here is really reliant on a couple things. One of them being gene editing technology in crop. And, this ranges from, like I said, specified manufacturing qualities all the way up to protein expression. But I think that's very important, and you're not going to really make the strides on ingredients price reductions without that, and being able to reduce manufacturing and etc. The next one being you really do need to drive down manufacturing costs to achieve that price parity with animal-based protein. That's kind of the genesis of this whole conversation, and I think it harkens back to the idea that a greater level of partnership between plant-based ingredients producers, the processors of those ingredients, the manufacturers, and then finally the commercial outlets for those. There needs to be a greater level of cooperation and manufacturing and clarity on what each side needs. That's very important. So, again, once more, there is an exceptional future here for a very environmentally beneficial technology. And I think that is something to celebrate. I also think something to celebrate is the massive corporate engagement now with the ingredient side of this equation, something that wasn't necessarily always the case. And corporates being willing to say, we're not going to go the commercial production avenue. And that sometimes means that they're going to exit the plant-based market. But oftentimes, as we're seeing now with Kerry and with Cargill and with Bayer, DSM and ADM and Cosun, that means that they're going to work with accelerators and incubators to really develop new innovation in this sector, particularly in the ingredient space, and forming genetic libraries. And you're also seeing great participation from university settings. The Plant-Based Protein Innovation Center at the University of Minnesota being an exceptional example. The University of Massachusetts at Amherst being another exceptional example of really making some great findings in this space. So partnerships are the key here. And I really think focusing on the ingredients level while these new manufacturing technologies come to, maturity and develop. And focusing on the ingredients level also allows you to create ingredients that are specified for various types of manufacturing. And that allows, extrusion to have their crops, spinning to have their crops, 3D printing to have their crops. So there's a need for diversity in this marketplace. It just needs time to develop. And that's going to go ahead and wrap it up for this initial episode on the plant-based meat and protein market. Hope you enjoyed. Again, this is Parker Bovée